Okay, your read aloud for today, Thursday, April 30th. So we're going to start today and then next week talking about biographies. We have read quite a few biographies this year, and think about what a biography is. Yeah, it's a story about one person. So the whole story talks about one person telling them, usually from their childhood to their, when they're in school up into their adulthood. Usually a biography is about a famous person. You're not going to find a biography about me in the library because I'm not famous. But here's a biography about Thomas Edison. So there he is as a child. It says young Thomas Edison. So this book will probably focus on just his younger years. It's written by Michael Dooling. And it looks like these are pictures that are painted. But this is real. Here's the back of it. There's Thomas Edison. He was an amazing person. Here's your title page, The Young Thomas Edison. And this was written in 2005, according to the copyright page. It's dedicated to Jane, as always. Thomas Alva Edison was born in a little house in Milan, Ohio. So he was born in Ohio. On February 11th, 1847, to Samuel and Nancy Edison. He was the youngest of 7 children. Thomas, who was called Young Al by his family, lived in an era very different from ours. There was no electricity, there was no telephone, no radio or CD player, not even a movie theater. So there was no electricity at all, no electric light. So they wanted to do anything at night, they had to light a fire or they had to have some kind of lantern. Thomas loved to experiment. In 1856, at the age of 9, he turned his family's cellar, another word for cellar is basement. He turned his family's cellar into a laboratory complete with test tubes, beakers, and whatever chemicals he could buy. It was a mess. Bottles were everywhere. Young Al would mix one chemical after another, sometimes following the experiments in his chemistry book, sometimes not. A little of this and a little of that, he used to mumble. His mother always encouraged him to ask questions, and he did. What is this? Why does that happen? How does it happen? Uh-oh. I'm not sure if I would let my 9-year-old. Look, that says poison, poison. Oh, that looks dangerous. A bout of scarlet fever. Scarlet fever is when a person, their fever goes really, 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 really high, and you have a sickness called scarlet fever, and it usually will affect your hearing and eyesight. Helen Keller, remember I read that book a couple months ago? She had scarlet fever and lost her eyesight and her hearing when she was very young. A bout of scarlet fever left Al hard of hearing, which made school very difficult. While Al was asked many questions at home, he did not answer any at school. Instead, he spent his time there daydreaming about his next experiment. Al was always in trouble. One day his teacher called him an adult and made him sit in the corner. Al's mother was so upset by this that she took him out of school only after 3 months. She knew that Al was not addled. He was a genius. School was too slow for him. So addled is actually a word I rarely hear. That's another word for being slow. Like the teacher said, oh, he can't learn. And that was actually the opposite, because he is a genius. So the mother took him out and she brought him home to teach. From then on, Al's mother, a former teacher, taught him at home. Mrs. Edison made sure he received an excellent education. He read Shakespeare, the Bible, history, and much more. Over the next few years, he also studied the great inventors such as Galileo. So she made sure he read. Look at that. Reading more, reading more. I love it. Yes, 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 yes. At age 12, young Al decided to look for a job. He needed money to continue his experiments. So he went into business as a paperboy on the train that went from Port Huron, where Edison's now lived, to Detroit, Michigan. Every morning from 7 a.m. to 10 a.m., Al sold newspapers. So he'd go on the train and sell newspapers. Then he spent all the day in the Detroit library reading and dreaming about his next experiment. He planned to read every book in the library, starting with the last book on the shelf and working back to the first. At night, he took the train home and sold papers again. Eventually, with the permission of the conductor, Al set up a laboratory in the baggage car of the train. Soon, the young scientist was experimenting with everything: chemicals, gadgets, test tubes, bakers, doohickeys, and thingamajigs. So this is the back of the train. He's experimenting. Wow, that is awesome. Every morning, Al continued to sell newspapers on the Grand Trunk Railway. Always ambitious, he expanded in his line of goods to include fruits and candies. By day, he would study at the library or do experiments in his baggage car, which he had completely taken over. He usually carried a book in his pocket and was always thinking about his next experiment. His days were exhausting, but he loved every second. So in the back of the train, he's doing experiments. After the Civil War began, everyone wanted the latest news. One day, Al sold 1,000 newspapers. With such a demand, Al decided to start his own newspaper. He bought a second-hand press and set up shop in the baggage car next to his laboratory. The Weekly Herald sold for 8 cents per month and soon reached a circulation of 400 copies. 15-year-old Al Edison was on top of the world: newsboy, salesman, businessman, and scientist. So he started to print his own paper. Things were going well until one day the train made a sudden lurch. Bottles, books, newspapers, candies, and fruits went flying, along with Al. A bottle of phosphorus burst into flame. Al scrambled to put out the flames, but they spread too fast. Soon a very upset conductor rushed in. He was so mad that he boxed Al's ears, and this worsened Al's hearing problem. At the next stop, the conductor threw all of Al's things off the train, even him. So when someone boxes your ears, that means they do that and they push really hard, and that affected Al's hearing. He got kicked off the train. He can't work there anymore. Al had never been so disappointed in his life. He went home and set up his laboratory again with the encouragement of his mother. He continued to experiment and tinker with every gadget he could get his hands on. Usually his experiments did not work, but he always kept on trying. Before long, Al had another job. He was Nightwire, a railroad telegraph operator in Strandford Junction, Canada. There was a lot to learn. For weeks, he soaked up all the information he could about telegraphy. Al learned Morse code and much more. He worked the 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. So he's working starting at 7 p.m., going all night to 7 a.m., often sleeping right in the station. He also set up his laboratory in the back room of the station so that he could experiment in his off hours. Apart from the occasional explosion, life was grand. So he's back to doing experiments again, and he's happy. One of Al's duties as the operator was to send a signal signal 6 every hour on the hour to show the dispatcher at the next station that he was awake. But the long hours sometimes caught up with him, and he would fall asleep. So the scientist in him had an idea. Soon Al had invented a device that hooked up to the telegraph key to a clock. When the hour struck, the minute hand of the clock sent a message, 6, for him. It was a moment of pure genius, which quickly got him fired when his boss discovered that he was sleeping on the job. So he invented an alarm clock. For the next 5 years, young Edison traveled all over the South and Midwest from one telegraph job to another. He continued to try to find ways to improve the telegraph. At age 21, he made his way to Boston, Massachusetts, and started using his first name, Thomas. He decided that he was going to be an inventor. He set up his latest laboratory. He wanted to learn all he could about electrical forces. His first patented invention was the electrical vote recorder. Unfortunately, Congress did not like the invention, and he could not sell it. Again, inventing. Over the years, Thomas's hearing had grown worse. By now, he was almost deaf. This did not hamper his creative abilities, though. In fact, he thought it even helped him to concentrate because he was not distracted by noises. It created a solitude where he could tune out the world and think. In 1869, Thomas moved to the New York City and then later established his laboratory in New York, New Jersey. And then bad news came from home. His mother had died. Thomas at 24 was deeply saddened. For a long time he could not even speak of her. He would miss her letters, her advice and encouragement. He owed everything to his mother. In 1876, Thomas moved his park to Menlo Park, New Jersey. He invented the carbon transmitter, which amplified the human voice, making the telephone and microphone possible. He also invented a machine that talked, called a phonograph. Shortly thereafter, Thomas invented the electric light bulb. He also discovered the principle of sound waves, which made the radio possible. In 1887, he moved his laboratory to West Orange, New Jersey, developing the motion picture and much more. At one point, he had 250 people working for him and 45 inventions going on. Wow, so he invented the light bulb. And then such strange, incredible inventions were coming out of his laboratory that people started to call Thomas the Wizard. He would live to be 84 years old and patent 1,093 inventions. Thomas would always remember his mother's encouraging words to ask questions. What is this? Why does that happen? How does that happen? So these are a lot of inventions that he did. That's his picture. And that's it. And I'm not going to read all that because of time. Okay, so you're going to learn about two different people today, one person today and then next week that you've never heard of. One is Cesar Chavez, really interesting man. And next week, a woman named Bessie Coleman. Oh my gosh, you will not believe what Bessie Coleman does. So, all right, I'll post some more later.